If you are a fan of a good biopic about a great music artist, boy, are you alive at the right moment, because there is at least a handful of biopics about inordinately famous music artists in various stages of production right now as we speak, at least one of which does officially have a release date. That is May 10th, when Back to Black comes out, the biopic about Amy Winehouse, and that's the first one I wanted to discuss. In fact, I'm going to do a whole series about all of these various biopics about great music artists that are in the works, because each of them deserves its own video. Each of them brings its own level of excitement to the subject, and I'm pretty pumped about this stuff too. It's very problematic in a lot of really important ways, because more often than not, the biopic about a great music artist, the true greats, the big ones, the ones that had some sizable, in some cases, seismic impact on culture, they kind of can tend to gloss over the uglier aspects of the subject's life. They can tend to try and cram so much into 90 minutes or 2 hours that it just feels like a hollow highlight reel. We're going to go over a couple of very recent biopics that absolutely suffered from those flaws. I'll show you what the critics themselves said about them, because their criticism is quite illuminating of the pitfalls that all too often are associated with biopics about famous music artists, okay? But here's the good news. They're going to try to put together this biopic about Amy Winehouse. It's already done. The trailer is out. Did you see it? I think it came out around January 12th. I will, of course, link to it in the description. Check it out. Back to Black is the name of the film, so it's also the song that undercuts the whole trailer. I find the trailer to be somewhat promising. There are reasons to be concerned as well with the Amy Winehouse biopic. We're going to go over all of that today. But there's also a Linda Ronstadt biopic coming out. There's no release date yet. It's in early production. But Selena Gomez is going to play Linda Ronstadt. How cool is that? Who saw that coming? In my video about that one, which I'll produce soon, you'll see Selena Gomez is bringing some genuine heart and passion to this role as Linda Ronstadt. So if you don't know who Linda Ronstadt is, that's okay. We'll talk all about it when I get into that. There's a Michael Jackson biopic in the works that, based on what I've read, promises to get into the good and the bad, the glorious and the gutting with respect to that strange genius's life, okay? Michael Jackson. We'll see. The jury will be out. I'll believe it when I see it. There's a Bob Dylan biopic in the works in which Timothée Chalamet plays Bob Dylan. And I have seen stories, as we'll go over in that video, of Dylan himself apparently getting his hands on the script and annotating in the margins of the screenplay. I mean, Dylan himself, he turns 83 in May this year, I believe, or 84. Wow. So that, Timothée Chalamet that's as hot a commodity in Hollywood as you get right now. He's out with the Wonka film I took my daughters to see, which is pretty cool. There's a Bruce Springsteen biopic in the works as well. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, how many billions of records combined did these people sell? I mean, it's great, especially Michael Jackson, right? I mean, give me a break. So this is a really exciting moment for the biopic, albeit as well a moment ridden with anxiety, because again, these biopics about great music artists can really have their struggles. Anyone watching this video knows that. I'm sure if you're watching this, you've been disappointed here and there by biopics recent and long ago about great music artists. What have been some examples of some great ones, though? I mean, you got Sid and Nancy, right? Sid Vicious of Sex Pistols. I mean, when you get Gary Oldman playing the lead role, and the lead role happens to be someone as complex and rich, emotionally, psychologically, and otherwise, as Sid Vicious, how can you go wrong? And that's one of the greatest, music biopics, to the extent that film, Sid and Nancy, necessarily fits comfortably, within that slot of biopic. That's a masterpiece. I mean, that's one of the greatest ever, right? Then you get Val Kilmer, so Sid and Nancy came out in 1986, and 5 years later, 1991, you get Val Kilmer playing the role of Jim Morrison of The Doors, one of my top 5 favorite bands. And Val Kilmer, with Oliver Stone directing, for my money, I thought Val killed it. That film had mixed reviews, but I love the film. I thought Val Kilmer nailed Jim Morrison's character. And Oliver Stone, I rather like his treatment of the Jim Morrison and the Doors story. So I thought that was a pretty successful one. Much more recently, of course, in 2004, you had Jamie Foxx winning Best Actor at the Oscars for his role as Ray Charles. So there's another one where the screenplay might have been somewhat formulaic. It might have been prone to some of those pitfalls I alluded to, in particular cramming so much about this Titanic life into the length limitations, length restrictions of a film, that it can come off as a bit of a highlight reel. But Jamie Foxx, give me a break. I mean, the authenticity, the grit, the talent, the brilliance that he brought to that role. There were some unforgettable scenes in there where he's carrying the whole scene, and absolutely deserving of Best Actor for that role as Ray Charles. Walk the Line. Then very next year in 2005, Ray came out in 2004. Next year you get Joaquin Phoenix playing Johnny Cash. And Reese Witherspoon, frankly, kind of stealing the show at times as June Carter Cash. Now, do I think, again, as a movie like with Ray, is it a great movie? It might be better as a movie than Ray. But man, Jamie Foxx as Ray Charles might be a thin hair superior to the also brilliant, talent that Joaquin Phoenix brought to Walk the Line as Johnny Cash. I remember that scene where Joaquin Phoenix as Johnny Cash is tearing apart a public restroom and rips a sink out of the wall. It's Joaquin being Joaquin. He probably found that somewhere within his own character and applied it to that of Johnny Cash. But Johnny Cash was at times just as volcanic as Joaquin Phoenix portrayed in that scene. And those are the moments when you're like, wow, I mean, this guy, he's bringing everything he's got to bear as an actor, Joaquin Phoenix. And he sang the songs himself on the soundtrack. I mean, that takes some chutzpah, right? I mean, Johnny Cash had one of the most memorable, bellowing vocals in the history of modern popular music. So that was impressive. Now, 2007, I would say my top 5 list of favorite biopics has to include Control. This is a film that came out in 2007 featuring Sam Riley playing the role of Ian Curtis from Joy Division. And Ian Curtis is one of my favorite, sort of characters in the history of popular music. I love Joy Division. Play Ceremony at My Funeral, dude. I mean, please. That stuff is just incredible. And the film does a lovely job of not, in an unflinching way, looking away from the uglier aspects of who Ian Curtis was. I mean, he treated his wife atrociously. Forgive me, I forget the name of the actress who plays his wife in there, but wow, what a beleaguered, character she was as a result of Ian Curtis's struggles, which were monumental. I mean, he hangs himself just after his daughter she's an infant, I think, when he takes his own life, or maybe a toddler at most. Later in life, if you look up the interviews, you see his wife and his daughter both have come to a sort of peace about, Ian Curtis suffering from epilepsy. You would have those epileptic fits on stage sometimes, and in his frantic manner of dancing was a reflection of his epileptic, fits that he would experience. There were other things that were really, really torturing Ian Curtis. And I just think that Control, which you've got to see if you haven't, Sam Riley just kills it. He won Best Actor at the Bratislava International Film Festival in Slovakia for his role there. By the way, Joaquin Phoenix was nominated for Best Actor for his role as Johnny Cash. Ray Charles, as we said, won the Oscar. Now, these are, for my money, probably as good as the biopic about a music artist is going to get, okay? But there have been some really problematic ones that, in a rather stereotypical fashion, just in the last couple of years, just missed the mark. There was this Elvis film, right? Did you see this? The Elvis film played with Austin Butler as Elvis, right? He does an admirable job as Elvis, but listen to some of the critical feedback that came in. Upon that film's release in 2022, Todd Gilchrist at the AV Club said, Luhrmann's fast-cutting super montage style overpowers the subject matter, and the result is an impressionistic, jumbled highlight reel of Presley's many accomplishments, despite vivid recreations by actor Austin Butler as the king. There you go. Listen to that language, an impressionistic, jumbled highlight reel. Exactly. When the anxiety that a director or a screenwriter has to experience when they're told to cram a life as loaded with impact as that of Elvis Presley's into 90 minutes or 120 minutes, more often than not, it seems that they flounder in the face of such anxiety, of such an ask. I mean, it's such a big thing to ask of any artist, the screenwriters, the directors, the actors themselves. Another piece of criticism that came out that I thought was kind of interesting, Luhrmann overlooks a lot of the horrible things that happened during Elvis's legacy to create a version that is worthy of the big screen. Now, that may or may not be true in the case of Elvis. It isn't clear which horrible things this reviewer is alluding to. But yes, you've got these complicated lives. We're all complicated, aren't we? And, it seems like the temptation to whitewash those complexities, to whitewash the uglier, grittier aspects of the lives of these, almost universally adored geniuses, is one that far too often proves impossible to resist among screenwriters and directors. The same was true of I Want to Dance with Somebody. I am a huge Whitney Houston fan. I will sing her praises until my last breath. But I Want to Dance Somebody, the biopic about Whitney in 2022, just listen to the critical feedback and you start to understand what the problem was with this film, which I think did a disservice to Whitney Houston. It was beneath her, in my view. And by the way, shout at me in the comments about, great biopics or terrible ones that I am omitting. I can't get to all of them. I'd be here for days. But yeah, if you think there are some great biopics out there that I'm not mentioning here, tell me. If I haven't seen them, I will watch them. I would love to. I'm always down for a good biopic about a music artist. But this, I Want to Dance with Somebody, 2022. Listen to this criticism. The Rotten Tomatoes critical consensus says this: another wiki biopic for posterity's sake. The relatively watchable I Want to Dance with Somebody leaves you feeling like you were on stage with Whitney Houston but didn't really get to dance with her. Well said. Well said. Another critic, this is Jenny Nulf at the Austin Chronicle, says, the film is like the spark notes of Houston's life, a smattering of collected moments that feel hollow again and again and again. You see critics themselves contending with the most common pitfalls of a biopic about a music artist, which is, an icon in Whitney Houston, a titanic reputation. I mean, the soaring anthems that emerge from that incredible woman's catalog with that unrivaled voice. To pack that all into this little, let's do this in 90 minutes, it might in some cases simply be impossible. And in some cases, and we'll talk about, documentarians and makers of biopics, they don't even try. They adopt alternate narrative structures to approach from sort of a slant angle these lives. And that might be the best way to go about it. It's going to be the least burdensome experience both for the filmmaker and for the viewer. Some other criticism that came out with respect to the Whitney Houston biopic, instead of utilizing the biopic genre to reveal, that's an important verb that you'll hear me using again and again today, reveal Houston's deeper emotionality, experiences, and relationships. This film often feels as though one is merely watching characters walk through a summary of her major life events. Again and again, this is the problem, not just with the Whitney Houston biopic, but with, I would say, probably most of them. Another one says, this is Wendy Ide in The Observer in the UK, this doggedly formulaic picture struggles to capture even a fraction of the electrifying sparkle of Houston at the peak of her powers. And part of the problem here is with a life like Whitney Houston, I mean, who doesn't know what the challenges were with Whitney? With drug addiction, Bobby Brown being what appears to have been a disgustingly abusive partner, right? in and out of court, and Whitney, to her last breath, is defending him, most likely untruthfully. She probably was. She admitted, I think, in one comment at least, that he had slapped her, but then she said she fought back and stood her ground. It wasn't good, okay? And failing to speak truthfully to the rougher moments of a life like Houston's, when the masses are aware of what her struggles were to maybe a large extent. I mean, we all know she struggled with addiction. We all know she had these abusive relationships in her life. So, you're doing a disservice to a legacy like hers to not speak truthfully to those experiences. And here's the double tragedy of it. If you are someone struggling with addiction, and you go and you watch this biopic of someone who is as revered as a Whitney Houston, and you see that even she can be crippled, paralyzed by addiction herself, if you're portraying it with honesty, with sort of the tenacious spirit of revelation that art really demands of the creator, you're feeling like, wow, I may be really screwed up right now. And my life might be, I might be scraping it out of the gutter to the best of my ability right now. But look at how normalizing and healing it feels to be able to see a Whitney Houston experiencing many of the same struggles that I did. I'm no Whitney Houston. I'm nobody compared to her. But in this one way, there's a common denominator between our human experiences, as dark as it may be. You're robbing the public, the viewing public, of the opportunity at having their own experiences normalized through a truthful portrayal of those struggles in the life of someone as a life as huge as that which Houston lived, right? Which gets us to the Amy Winehouse biopic. Here again, this is scheduled. It's Back to Black is the title. So that's her second and final studio album, Back to Black, with Rehab on it. It won 5 Grammy Awards in the same year, in 2008. I mean, it was as big as it gets, guys, okay? I mean, it's a beautiful, brilliant record. She was a beautiful, brilliant talent. It absolutely sucks that we've gone 13 years now without her. That sucks. It's tragic. It doesn't describe the loss there, okay? But, 13 years later, is that too soon? That's something that we have to think about. Especially with, as we'll get into, there have already been 2 documentaries about Amy Winehouse. There was one in 2015. The BBC did one in 2021, both critically acclaimed. The one in 2015 won an Oscar. Okay, so it's not like, the world has been waiting for some filmmaker to get his or her hands on Amy Winehouse's story. This one is not a documentary. It's a biopic, and it's by Sam Taylor Johnson, who directed 50 Shades of Grey. And much more relevantly, did a biopic about John Lennon in 2009 called Nowhere Boy, which was released to rather positive reviews. It's got, I think, an 80% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So this is a filmmaker in Sam Taylor Johnson who has some experience getting her hands dirty with the life of a complicated musical genius. You don't get much more, aligned with that vein, that narrative of a complicated but tortured musical genius. I mean, John Lennon's childhood was trash. I mean, just Google for a minute and look at, it's unspeakable what he, as a little boy, had to endure. And that's what this film primarily focuses on, is John Lennon's early years. So I am heartened to see that this film has been directed by someone who previously made a film about one of the Beatles, so she's got some agility with the biopic genre. I think that's promising. Marisa Abela is playing the lead role of Amy Winehouse. I'm going to be frank with you. I tried. I can't find a whole lot that she's done. So I think that's kind of cool because they're taking a chance on a relatively unproven talent. I say relative to some of the bigger names that perhaps could have taken a stab at this role. I'm very excited for Marisa Abela to have something like this to chew on as an actress. I mean, this is a heavy role for her to take on. Again, I'll link to the trailer in the description. It's already out, so you can check that out. Now, Amy Winehouse died at age 27. Yes, everyone makes a big deal about the 27 Club. I've talked about it as in my video about the Brian Jones documentary. Yes, she was a member of the 27 Club. All these great musical artists, Jim Morrison, Kurt Cobain, Janis Joplin, etc., who died at age 27. Her death at age 27 was on July 23rd, 2011. 7 months later, we lose Whitney Houston at age 48. She dies on February 11th, 2012, as the Grammy Awards in 2012 were just kicking off. So these are two titanic losses. We lost two iconic women in music 7 months apart, the latter of which died at metaphorically on the doorstep of the Grammys. And Tony Bennett said, if you recall, you can find it on YouTube, at that year, he came out and said, does this solve the problem? Of course not. But the sentiment is important. Tony Bennett, who was, by the way, an icon to Amy Winehouse, she worshipped Tony Bennett, okay? And it was Tony Bennett who said, after watching, and he was aware of how Amy Winehouse felt about him. And 7 months later, there he is, grappling with the death of Whitney Houston. And he says at the Grammys, can we just legalize drugs? Would that solve the problem? No, but it might normalize it. It might help perhaps normalize, addiction. I think that was part of the sentiment that Tony Bennett was expressing. I understand it's a very controversial stance to take. The notion that would solve the whole problem is utterly naive, and I accept that too. But that's what Tony Bennett said. And I think, the instinct that he brought to those comments, which is one that suggests maybe if we've found it within ourselves as a society to normalize addiction, the stigma might be taken off and it perhaps, God forbid, be replaced with compassion and a genuine urge to invest resources in the problem rather than stigmatize it or incarcerate, etc. That's what Tony Bennett was saying about the tragic death of Whitney Houston at age 48. 7 months after we lost, at age 27, Amy Winehouse, who loved jazz, loved Tony Bennett, watched the documentary that came out in 2015. She explicitly references Tony Bennett multiple times. Look at the look on her face at the 2008 Grammys when it's Tony Bennett himself who's about to announce one of her Grammy wins on stage. She couldn't believe it. And Tony Bennett was aware of this. Okay? So this was a really dark period for music, okay? When we lost Amy Winehouse 7 months prior to losing Whitney Houston. She wins 5 Grammy Awards, as I said, in 2008. So Amy Winehouse may not have been the icon that Whitney Houston was, but she herself, in her own way, was undoubtedly an icon among female music artists. But here's the thing. I mean, how long ago was 2011? And this is where some of the anxiety, the angst, the anger, frankly, among Amy Winehouse fans that has emerged in the aftermath of the announcement that this biopic about Amy Winehouse is coming out comes from. It's not necessarily that, this biopic shouldn't be made. But some of the criticisms that I'm going to go through here emerge perhaps in part from a sense that it might still be too soon. I mean, 2011 wasn't that long ago. I'm 44. Some of my most vivid memories as a fan of music are in my own lifetime of watching Amy Winehouse perform live. I vividly remember her vibrant presence on stage. She still dances and sings Rehab across the stage of my imagination routinely, and so that's how recently she was around. So I understand. 13 years ago, we can quibble about whether it's too soon or whether that was longer ago than I'm making it out to seem here. To me, it doesn't feel like that long ago. And then you wonder, well, what is the urge to perhaps rush this biopic out, especially when two documentaries predate it? Okay. Here's the problem with the time frame. How possible is it to, like, in an objective fashion, present a story as complex and tragic as Amy Winehouse's? Are there too many people, family and friends, whose interests will be to protect rather than reveal? as was a criticism brought up with respect to the Whitney Houston biopic, the character of Amy Winehouse in a way that would be illuminating and healing to those who might find their own similar struggles normalized by such a truthful and honest treatment of Amy Winehouse's own demons. You know, I mean, when Kevin Spacey came out with his biopic about Bobby Darin in 2004, that was 31 years after Bobby Darin died at age 37 in 1973. That might be right. That might be about right. It takes time. We live in such an impatient society. You know, I don't want to lecture. I'll tiptoe onto a soapbox for a second here and say, you know, things like social media, like texting, the instant gratification that has been coded into the programs of our souls at this point as human beings makes us so impatient to just, you know, let's get these biopics, let's churn them out. You know, Whitney Houston hadn't been dead for a decade before her biopic came out, you know? So, you know, Kevin Spacey gave it 3 decades, and maybe that's the amount of time it takes to summon the capacity to present a life like Bobby Darin's in a way that is objective. I rather liked that film. It was largely trashed critically, but I'm a Bobby Darin fan. I love you know, some of his stuff. I grew up, I've said on other videos, I mean, I grew up listening to oldies. Bobby Darin is woven into the fabric of my these listeners that I have, and I mean that's stuff I grew up with. So maybe that's why I enjoyed the film more than perhaps others. But what I particularly enjoy now in retrospect is that decades passed before that film was made. Okay, and there's a certain objectivity you can achieve decades beyond the death of the subject that perhaps 10, 13 years beyond the subject's death you can't quite summon yet. And part of the problem here is there's her family, okay? And People magazine reported that this film, quote, was made with the full support of the Amy Winehouse estate. And to that I say, yikes. Because what is their vested interest going to be? Are they going to be committed to a truthful representation of Amy Winehouse's story in all its triumphs and tragedies? The good and the bad. You know? The great and the ugly. I don't think so. Her dad, this story went on to say, a BBC story about this biopic came out and said, Winehouse's father, Mitch, who is all over the documentary in 2015, by the way, that apparently he was an opponent of, is also involved in this biopic, which raises concerns that he may in some way attempt to rewrite his daughter's story. He was a vocal opponent of Capadia's, that's the director of the 2015 documentary for its less than flattering portrayal. I've watched the doc. I don't know that I find it to be unflattering so much as I find it to be honest and truthful. Why judge the truth? Why color the truth a certain way? The truth is itself. It's not discriminating. It's factual. And there are plenty of people who praise the hell out of Amy Winehouse throughout that documentary. The documentary makes it rather apparent that she was a unique, brilliant talent, the loss of which is absolutely devastating. But at times, yes, there were people who also were honest about her shortcomings. I mean, God forbid. I mean, we all are flawed, right? And Amy Winehouse, for all her fame, also had her own demons to grapple with, and hers were more tragic than most. For sure, you know. So you know, here's again the concern is this is going to be some kind of whitewash that merely glosses over the grittier parts of Amy Winehouse's story, if it dares to cast its gaze upon those grittier aspects of her story at all. I mean, with Dad breathing down your neck. Listen, I know this firsthand. Okay, I'm no filmmaker, but I'm an author. I wrote a biography that for a major publisher that earned a film deal, the whole works, okay? And I can tell you that I experienced the need to contend with the wishes of family and the subject who's still alive, about whom I wrote the book, to, you know, can we haggle with each other about what's going to be in the book and what's going to be left out? I mean, I'm just being honest. Ultimately, I was happy with the compromise we came to because I do believe that I was able to bring plenty of grit to the stories I told about the subject of my book. But the fact that the fact that that has to be a dynamic involved in a work of art is unfortunate, but to pretend that that's not a dynamic involved in the process of making a film about someone who died as recently ago as 13 years ago, right? Family still around, dad still around, wanting to cast his influence about as Sam Taylor Johnson's trying to make this film, to secure the participation of your subject, which was the reason that I went forward with this, despite knowing that this was going to be a variable I had to contend with. I knew I was going to get access. I was going to get stories. I was going to get interviews that I might not get had I taken some kind of unauthorized approach to the biography that I wrote. I imagine the same is true for this film director. I mean, I'm saying this just days ago, Richard Simmons came out and disavowed the biopic about him that's coming out. He said, I never gave anyone permission to make this film. So one wonders, how the film even came to be without having the kind of access that might have become available had they found some way of securing Richard Simmons' agreement, which they probably couldn't have because Richard Simmons has notoriously dropped off the face of the earth and wants nothing to do with the fame and notoriety he formerly knew. There was that big story that came out about someone who successfully tracked him down and wanted to figure out what the hell happened to Richard Simmons. So these two are sort of the dynamics involved in making biopics about people who are still alive or relatively recently deceased. All right, people, they're going to be family and friends with vested interests that aren't going to be devoted to art. They're going to be devoted to sort of torturing a narrative with a hammer and chisel into something that they approve of. And that's where the result can more often than not fall somewhere beneath art itself. It's not art anymore because art is not made by committee. I mean, the very last thing it does is look away from the uglier aspects of reality. Real art doesn't do that. It's got to gauge unflinchingly at everything, the glorious and the gutting, if it's going to be worth the efforts that its creation demanded. Okay? And this is what fans, in part, are grappling with respect to this Amy Winehouse documentary. Now, the thing with Amy, to do that, to whitewash, Amy's story, is to do a disservice to her own music. I mean, did Amy whitewash her own story? I mean, think about Rehab, Back to Black, those lyrics. Very personal. She said, that she prided herself on that kind of confessional songwriting. That's all over the 2015 documentary. Again, watch it. She, in this really humble, I thought, if moving way, said, yes, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially at one point in the documentary, she says, I write very personal songs. Yes, the content sometimes is sad, but I want to make something good of something bad. That's how she puts it. I want to make something good of something bad. And this film about Amy Winehouse, if it's going to be worthy of her legacy, is going to be something good about something bad. There's no way around that. We all know what happened to Amy. This woman disintegrated in public, okay? We saw it. So who are you fooling by glossing over that? And this is my hope. If you can't tell her story honestly, don't tell it at all. What's the point, right? But there are others who take the opposite stance, which is, well, they're just making this Amy Winehouse biopic to sensationalize those dirtier, uglier details of her life and cash in on it. Roisin O'Connor had this criticism in a BBC piece. She said, given the vulture-like efficiency with which her life was picked over, it's near impossible to think of a sincere reason to make a movie about Winehouse, at least not one that isn't motivated by greed. But to me, the time-worn story of a brilliant artist at war with herself never will cease to be fascinating. That in and of itself is enough justification to make the film. I love the tales, that movies like this can tell of the sort of darker rooms festering within the souls of greats and geniuses. And I think that dynamic will always justify telling the story of the narratives, the sort of the pain and the pleasure that can emerge from the stories that those dark rooms festering within the souls of geniuses can generate. So to me, again, I don't know that those criticisms really are to be taken at face value. I think there's just an anxiety about this still being a little too soon. Again, there's the documentary in 2015. But despite the 2015 documentary and the BBC documentary in 2021, I still think a biopic is needed because it provides a talented actress, in this case Marisa Abela, the opportunity to explore Winehouse's sort of being without getting handcuffed to the blow-by-blow account, the cradle-to-grave narrative approach that a documentary often will take. That's pretty much the approach. I mean, the earliest scenes are in the 2015 documentary show Winehouse as a teenager doing an incredible performance of the song Happy Birthday. And you're hearing this teenager, I think she was 14 in this scene, something like that. And she's just singing Happy Birthday, but doing it with a panache and a flourish, all her own. And you're even just listening to this girl at the time, sing Happy Birthday, like, oh my God, listen to this voice. Wow, what a gift she had. And again, it breaks my heart saying this out loud because she's gone, and has been gone for 13 years. And again, I can't say it enough. That sucks. And you get that sense watching this 2015 documentary of the loss of her own life, the loss the impact of that loss on those who loved her. But yes, people like us, who were the beneficiaries of that genius, as her listeners, as her fans. It's gutting. It's devastating. And I hope none of this noise about the biopic overrides that or distracts us from that singular fact, that the fact that she's not around anymore is dark and tragic. Moon Age Daydream, Brett Morgan's documentary about David Bowie, I think is one such example of a documentary that was like, you know what, that's not the narrative approach I'm going to take. This isn't going to be cradle to grave. I've got an totally overwhelming amount of material provided to me by the David Bowie estate, thousands upon thousands of hours of footage. And Brett Morgan does not take any chiseled narrative approach to it. I found it to be a little ADD as an experience when I took my daughter to see it. My 10-year-old is a big David Bowie fan. She loves Labyrinth, all of that. So I actually took her to see this documentary. She liked it. I liked it too. I'm a huge Bowie fan, but the narrative approach that Brett Morgan takes to that film, I think, was laudable because he defied the narrative tropes that typify these kind of documentaries. While at the same time I found it to be a little scattered and overwhelming. But bottom line, I think, is this anxiety that Shad D'Souza espoused in The Guardian with this quote: "With Sofia Coppola's biopic of Priscilla Presley in cinemas now, I haven't seen Priscilla yet, but I want to. To me, it looks pretty damn good. I hope I get to see it before it leaves theaters. And the lives of pop stars like Britney Spears being re-examined. It is clear that stories about female celebrities who experience abuse or hardship are popular, but what does that mean for Amy Winehouse? More recently, it had begun to feel as if Winehouse was finally being remembered, not as a purely tragic figure, but as a generational talent who released 2 cherished records and someone who wasn't purely self-destructive, but a victim of systematic abuse and mental illness. Back to Black, the biopic, threatens not to honor that legacy, but to revive all the demeaning noise that obscured it in the first place." What the hell are you talking about, Shad? This doesn't make any sense to me. Why can't it be both? What's this insistence on an only black or white narrative approach to this complicated genius's legacy? How boring would such art be? She has to be all good or all bad? Maybe you think that's not what you're saying, but how can someone not glean that interpretation from this quote, Shad? No one is wholly defined by their vices or their virtues. None of us. We all have both. Some, in the cases of Amy Winehouse and Whitney Houston, we have them, those vices and virtues are cast into higher relief. They live larger lives than most of us. They fail and disintegrate in public, as Amy Winehouse and Whitney Houston did. But we human beings are complicated mixtures of both, vice and virtue. Why should Amy Winehouse be different? And by the way, who really defines Amy Winehouse as only a tragic figure? Who does that? People who recognize and look at the tragedy undercutting her life don't. It is not implied that in doing so they overlook what was great about her too. I don't understand that. And a film that looks at both as it should, if it's going to be worthy of being even, called art, is doing its job. That's how you do your job telling a story like this. So I don't understand the anxieties about sensationalism. I understand that, yes, her struggles could be sensationalized, certainly. Yes, she had problems with paparazzi who were disgustingly invasive of her privacy. Although, when you reach the heights of fame that Amy Winehouse did, to some extent, that's part of the bargain. But, it just looks, it's like there's this war going on among people who want to fight for being the person who gets to define Amy Winehouse's legacy. And they want it to be black or white, all good or all bad. No, she was this. No, she was this. How self-serving is that? This woman is dead. We lost her. It's terrible. And that's what matters. And then who cares about that? Like, that's the human tragedy underlying Amy Winehouse's story, okay? And you want to talk about, and what was this language in the Shad quote about systemic abuse, right? So this is someone who, I'm just going to say it, is bringing some kind of political agenda to her angst about this Amy Winehouse biopic, okay? That's about you, Shad. That has nothing to do with Amy Winehouse or the biopic. Okay, you're talking through your own experience there. I'm looking forward to this film. I hope it's released to decent reviews. I think people like Shad expressing these concerns might want to think about a few lines from one of my favorite Walt Whitman passages in Leaves of Grass, which is, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." Amy Winehouse contained multitudes, and so do all of us. And that's part of what makes their stories so richly engaging to the masses, is despite the outsized lives that they lived, in a really important sense, they were just like the rest of us. They contain multitudes, contradictions. I Contain Multitudes is the title of the first track on the last Bob Dylan studio record. This is a thing. We all are complicated interweavings of contradictions. I don't understand why we need to pretend that Amy Winehouse somehow was different. I'm hopeful about this film. I hope that it finds that balance between unflinchingly looking at the uglier, grittier parts of her life, while also telling the great parts of her life, what made her talent, the joyfulness of her character, of her being, that at times comes out in the 2015 documentary, the things that people loved about her that had nothing to do with her musical talent, but really with her gregarious, outgoing, fun, engaging, brilliant, radiant personality, okay? While, not sensationalizing the ugly parts, but don't look away from them. And yes, telling us what made Amy Winehouse great. That's probably the perfect balance to strike here. We'll see. May 10th is the release date. If you're an Amy Winehouse fan, you got to see it. If you're just a music fan, I think this is one of the more fascinating, dare I say it. I know I'm calling something fascinating that also was rather troubling. I get it. But as Amy Winehouse said, let's make something good of something bad. That's what she tried to do with her songs. And some of her most iconic songs. Rehab and Back to Black, etc. Check it out. See what you think. And come back over to The Curious Listener for this whole series I'm going to be doing about all these biopics about huge talents that are in various stages of production now. Again, it's going to be, we've got Linda Ronstadt being played by Selena Gomez, Dylan being played by Timothy Chalamet, a Bruce Springsteen biopic, a Michael Jackson biopic. I'm going to be talking about all of them over the coming weeks. So coming back for that. And again, chime in your comments about great music biopics that you've seen or ones that you thought were terrible. Maybe you disagree with some of the ones I've called out here. I'd love to chat with you guys about that and watch some of the ones you mentioned that I haven't. So we'll see, guys. We'll see this Amy Winehouse biopic, how it turns out. Come back later on for some discussion about these other ones. That's going to be coming up in the next few weeks. I'll see you then.